my fellow church members, we are so glad to have you participating in this Easter service, which is coupled with a JPRC talk. And we are happy that our guest was able to make it to this church. And even beyond that, we have PLO Lumumba, who also came to worship with us. And I must tell you that the speaker, who I'm going to introduce in a few minutes, and PLO Lumumba and I are engaged in a matter that is trying to speak to the governance of this nation, participating in finding ways of doing the very best that a human being can do with our limitations to ensure that this country stays together. So, I want to greet you all in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, and I thank you so sincerely for taking part in today's service. This is an important subject, that is, protecting the Constitution from political interests and intrigues. Today, our country is facing severe economic problems and political differences, which require divine intervention and sacrifice on the part of all Kenyans of goodwill in order to overcome. It is also a time of celebration when our Lord Jesus was crucified and paid a heavy price to save this world. It is a time when our political leaders ought to sacrifice their personal ambitions for the good of the nation, which is our inheritance from God. The Constitution, which we are talking about today, is the heart of our nation, which requires great care and protection in God's name, as it creates order in the life of a nation. And I may want to remind you that the reason why there is JPRC in the PCA church is because the church believes in doing something beyond preaching the gospel. And in following the example of our Master, Jesus Christ, who went about doing good, the church has a responsibility to educate its people, to treat the sick, and to do many other things, including charitable work. And therefore, what we are doing today in this talk is to educate ourselves about the difficulties that the country is facing economically and politically. And with us, we have Dr. Ekuru Aukot. This morning he was here with his wife and children, but they have had to go home to meet other commitments. But he's not lonely because PLO is just behind him, and PLO's wife is also behind him. And I'm there too because, as I said earlier, we are doing some things together about this country. Dr. Ekuru has a bachelor's degree in law from the University of Nairobi, a master's degree in law from the University of Warwick, UK, and a PhD from the same university. He has lectured in constitutional law in a number of universities and institutions. Professionally, He is a constitutional law and an advocate of the High Court. He is well known for steering, as its secretary, the committee of experts which finalized the Boma's draft of the Constitution, giving birth to the current 2010 Constitution. And for those of you who may not remember, before him, there was PLO himself, who was the secretary of the JPRC. And I believe we all know that. And the Boma's draft was being discussed under his leadership with the Professor Yash Guy. Dr. Ekuru is one of the law experts who are advising a number of countries in their constitutional review processes, including Gambia, South Sudan, Lesotho, Somalia, Madagascar, and several others. He has a passion and a concern for the people. And for that reason, he has a private foundation which supports the education of the disadvantaged. And as you probably know, he is the founder and leader of the Third Way Alliance Kenya, a political party pursuing transformative leadership. And he was the party's presidential candidate in 2017 general election. He's married to Lorna, and they are blessed with 2 children who are here this morning. And we sincerely welcome the speaker with open hands, and we want to encourage him and his family to consider joining us in this church as and when they are free, and even if they want to become members, they are most welcome. Karibu Daktari. And after he speaks, we will give our dear PLO 3 minutes to greet you and say something.
Asante sana mzee Wambugu, and thanks so much for the invitation. I'm Jambo. Happy Easter to you all. Now, I'll try to be very brief so that we probably can have some conversations. But like I started in the morning by asking, when we assemble in a holy place like this, we always say we are the children of God. And that, we don't identify ourselves with names or wherever we come from. But I've always wondered, why is it that as soon as we step outside that door, we became Turkana, Kikuyu, Jaluo, and that plays out in our political engagements. And probably that's part of the reason why we never really resolve some of our problems, because like I think Chungaji Ngoyo say, we have never personalized the ministries. And because of that non-personalization of the ministries, we still take our primitive behaviors out there, which sometimes we pretend we don't actually play around in the house of God. But having said that, I was told to talk about protection of the Constitution from political interests and intrigues. Now, I'll try to highlight very briefly about 6 key areas, briefly. The importance of a Constitution in our country or in any other country in the world, and why, number 2, why it is important to protect that Constitution once you agree on it. And basically also say how we can, just share 1 or 2 examples of how we can protect, or what can we do as citizens to protect that Constitution. And I also want to share, because part of the reason we're having this conversation is those political interests and intrigues that are playing out in our country, which to a large extent actually affect that very Constitution or those, the laws. Number 5 is to just share with you recent examples of violation of our Constitution by political class. Because of the interest they have, they end up disobeying the Constitution. and I'll make some concluding remarks. So the importance of a constitution can be seen through a people's or a nation's struggle to address its difficult societal problems, such as their oppression, for example, by a foreign element. In our history, we were colonized. So there was that agitation to see us fix that colonization. But also sometimes internal bodies, such as our own government, failing to govern properly, failing to protect human rights, and all those things. Oppression of, and refusal to identify minorities, to grant them their rights. Our desire to have a just society and protect human rights of all. Part of our constitution addresses issues of equality, a government of the people, democracy, equitable distribution of resources. And, you know, for some of us, I come from Turkana, and by the way, people sometimes say, you know, this is a bit of Kenyan saying, unatoka wapi? I'm not ashamed of being a Turkana, because I don't think any of us wrote a letter to God to say I want to be born a Kikuyu or a Luo. In fact, what we should do is to celebrate our diversity, because I do not know whether this Kenya can be complete without the Kikuyus, the Luos, the Luyas, the Turkanas. So, but when that discrimination or marginalizations happen within a context such as ours, then of course you start feeling, am I really a Kenyan like any others? I'm sure you've heard the phrase, wengine wakisema, wengine wetu tunavumilia tu kwa Wakenya. Kuna wananchi na kuna wenye nchi. Yeah, so it is our own constitution addresses many of our concerns, many of our problems as a nation in 18 chapters with 264 articles and 6 schedules. Hebu acha niwaembarrass sasa. How many of us have read the constitution? See? Pastor Nguyo, you can see why we need to personalize his ministry. So, if you have not read the constitution, how then will you know that your problem or your concern is being addressed in all those chapters? So, a lot of people think that constitution are just for lawyers or for politicians. That's where we go wrong. So you will see that in the struggle to have a constitution, many lives are lost. Institutions are destroyed. Resources are lost. People are humiliated, dehumanized. In front of their children, their wives, their relatives, they are shackled like slaves. I remember a story I like using of a mzee called Gitu Wakaengeri. Gitu Wakaengeri, together with his father, Kaengeri wa Gitu, found themselves in a prison somewhere in Lamu. So you can imagine a father and a son being imprisoned because of colonialism. So if you recall the independence struggle to liberate our country, we know the struggles we're going through. We did not want a foreign government. We did not want our land to be stolen. You know, we did not want, some foreigners telling us how to do, to behave ourselves. So the outcome, because of that oppression, we started agitating for our own independence, to begin with, a freedom from oppression. Then that resulted into what we now call the Independent Constitution of 1963, which was also not negotiated or written in our own soil, but negotiated somewhere in a house in Lancaster, in the Lancaster House Conference in England. So we celebrated that we now have a new constitution. But I want to remind you the wisdom of a man called David Lamb. And David Lamb, in a book called The Africans, said that, you know, African people are celebrating the fact that they have chased away a white man, only to realize they have actually replaced them with black colonialists who are more concerned with the accumulation of wealth and the development of their own people. So, at independence, we said we will address disease, ignorance, and poverty. Then we started becoming tribal. We started saying, our people, it's our turn to be president, it's our turn to do this. So, segregation, for me, I think my people still say today, when I go back to Turkana and use habari ya Kenya, for a long time they have never seen themselves as part of this nation. And that is the extent to which the constitution has not been implemented or people's problems have not been addressed. So it is apparent that the struggle for good constitutions, constitutionalism, which is really the culture of practicing that which is contained in that document, and good leaders did not end with the hand of colonialism in our country. In our own country, there are numerous amendments of the Constitution, or if you like, bastardization of the Constitution to achieve certain political endgames. One of the funniest one, if I can recall, and my teacher of law, PLO Lumumba, is here. If I misrepresent, I think he'll correct me. You remember the earlier amendments were concerned. One of them that I want to share with you an example was an amendment that was brought hurriedly in the afternoon one day in Parliament, when one of the cronies of Mzee Kenyatta could not address Parliament in English. So they had to quickly amend the Constitution to introduce the use of Kiswahili. I think that was to accommodate Paul Ngei, if I'm not wrong, because they are friends, or I don't know who it is. But it was a very interesting amendment. But it was based more in terms of how do we take care of our political interests, of our friends, using the constitutional order. So from 90s all through up to 2005, when we had the first failed referendum, and then lastly 2010, when now we got the new constitution. So the struggle for constitution has been part of our lives. Even today, we now hear of possible constitutional amendment through the bipartisan dialogue. So that's why I think a constitution is very important, and we could talk on and on about this because it's a bigger subject. But you must also know that constitutions generally are negotiated agreements, which is why from the CKRC process going to the people, even the committee of experts, before we finalized in 2010, we still went to the people. We asked them, what do you want? There was a lot of compromises here and there. So there's a lot of negotiation. But once you agree in that political negotiation or process that this is the constitution, then it becomes the law. So why is it then important to protect a constitution? The constitution, simply put, is the will of the people. It is an identity document, so that when you read it, you'll know this is what the people of Kenya are, this is who the people of Kenya are. This is what they believe in terms of their cultural aspiration, in terms of their beliefs, and what they believe and how they want to be governed. So that you cannot deviate outside how people want to be governed. It is the highest law in the land. Not even a rule, a regulation, or political agreements in boardrooms can supersede the Constitution. Not even political interest. In Article 1, because many of you have not read the Constitution, it says that all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. And shall, and I demand the word shall be exercised only in accordance with this Constitution. Therefore, no one can exercise any power if it's not derived from the Constitution. So political interests cannot override the power of the people, the will of the people. And the Constitution even gives an avenue when the political interests attempt to supersede that power of the people. And it says in Article 1, sub-Article 2, the people may now exercise their sovereign power either directly or through their democratically elected representatives. And if the democratically elected representatives fail to govern in accordance with this Constitution, Article 104 of the Constitution has given you power to recall them, because by that time, they have become your employees. Today, if your house girl, your house boy, your employee misbehaved, there's a way in which you must must punish that employee. So Article 104 has what's called the right to recall. But of course, parliamentarians made it so difficult that you cannot recall them. You know, it's like locking together hyenas and goats in the same pen, and tomorrow you expect that our goat will not be eaten. So that's the extent to which sometimes I see the weaknesses in our Constitution, when we expect Parliament shall pass certain law to implement this Constitution. So then how do we protect it? Now that we know the importance of the Constitution, why we must protect the Constitution, so how do we protect it? So just a number of things. Because you've already shown by way of your hands that you're actually not aware. So you need to create citizen awareness on the Constitution. And maybe this is the challenge, Mzee Wambugu, must throw back to your committee. You cannot protect that which you do not know, or that which you do not own. Majority of Kenyans have not read and comprehended the Constitution, and I've seen the evidence here today. They think it is for lawyers or politicians. So there is need to carry out massive civic education from as early as nursery schools, Sunday schools, to ensure majority of citizens are able to understand the contents of the Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, resource allocation, developmental aspect of the Constitution, and the consequences of disobeying the Constitution. The lawyers will remind you that ignorance of the law is not a defense in any court of law. So you don't sit and say, I did not know stealing is an offense. You know, you'll go to jail. Number two, I think what we can do is invoke judicial intervention. Basically, we are saying here is that if you see a constitution is being violated, you can go to court. And many people think, because that violation has not been visited upon me, but it's my neighbor, I cannot. Now, the Constitution at Article 258 states that anyone can move court to ensure the Constitution is enforced. The Constitution also allows you to go on behalf of that person whose rights are being violated. That's called enforcement of the Constitution. When BPI was being shoved down our throats, we went to court as the Third Way Alliance Kenya, and we successfully convinced the court that BPI was not a need for Kenyans right now. The third thing I think you can do is to enhance independence of independent offices. But the truth for the matter also now is that some of these independent offices do not understand the word independent. They're only independent in word, but their independence is again being compromised politically. They begin to serve the interests of the political people who appoint them. For example, let's just give you one example. I am very appalled by the conduct of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. Before this new government came into place, a lot of the politicians had so many offenses before them. Suspects of crime such as murder, rape, theft of public resources, which they bastardize and call it corruption. Because I don't know in your mother tongue, at least in my mother tongue, Turkana, we don't know the word corruption. But if you steal from someone, to kuita mwizi, that word I think sinks closer home, that you have actually stolen. But of course they say corruption. So you'll realize that the office of the DPP, even though it's supposed to be an independent office, with tenure of office for 8 years, you cannot touch him. And I don't know how many of you remember, for example, what they call Kamata Kamata Friday. You'll be arrested on Friday, you'll be detained, brought to court on Monday. Before that, you will have issued a statement saying, we are satisfied that the evidence brought before us is enough to secure a conviction of this suspect. Now, you know after this new government came, a lot of those cases were being dropped, including some that are being considered today. So the idea of enhancing the independence of this office is very, very important. But lastly, in terms of what you can do, I think you need to shout out against impunity and selective application of the law. We have seen court orders being defied by top government officials with no consequences. Courts must be firm, in my view, whenever a government official defies a court order. They must be committed to civil jail. With impunity, no constitution, however progressive it may be, would work for the people, and the political class will always violate it in pursuit of their personal interest. So every Kenyan must be equal before the law. So the Constitution further requires all of us here at Article 3 to uphold, to respect, first of all, uphold, and defend the Constitution. So now if you have not read, how then do you respect, uphold, and defend this Constitution? This also includes the church and its congregations. It further provides that any attempt to establish a government otherwise than compliance with the Constitution is unlawful. But we saw an attempt in 2018 when somebody saw himself as another president, meaning that there are two presidents in Kenya. So let me go to the next point, which is, what are some of the examples of intrigues or political interests that, in my view, are actually undermining the constitutional order in this country? By political interest, let me adopt this analogy of convenient political marriages that do not last for long. It is also alliances that are not necessarily in the interest of the constitutional order, but our personal political gain and short-term interests of the political class. I've used the word political marriages because also, from a social point of view, as a practicing advocate, I keep telling my clients, if a marriage survives 3 years, please keep it. Because if you go to the family division of the High Court, the rate with which people are divorcing in this country is very, very, very high. But also the rate with which political marriages are breaking up is also very, very high. Every electoral cycle, there is a new marriage of people who may have shouted, abused, insulted each other. So what are some of these examples? I'll take you back to what my Luo relatives used to call cooperation and partnership. In 1997, you'll remember the cooperation and partnership between KANU and UNDP. And you'll also recall the phrase that the Jogo has swallowed the tractor. Jogo amemeza tractor. So you remember Raila and President Moi then were like almost sworn enemies. He was even detained for a number of years. But for some reason, they reached a pact that, now we can work together. And when he was made a minister and a few of his other friends were given plum government jobs, the agitation, they forgot about the agitation. So that was what I think, the first, probably in the most recent past, political interest and intrigue that actually made these people even forget that there was a lot of torture. We forgot to talk about Nyayo torture chambers, Nyati torture chambers, extrajudicial killing, which was a part of the lingua at that time. The second one was in 2002, the National Rainbow Coalition government, the NAC government. It brought together all the warring factions. And always the talk was, let's review the independent constitution because it wasn't serving us right. So they continued the work of the CKRC, and I'm happy PLO Lumumba is here, and Mzee Wambugu was also, I think, a delegate at that time, and the Bombers of Kenya. Because of political interest again, disagreement ensued, and the proposed constitution negotiated at Bombers that went to the referendum in 2005 collapsed. So that marriage also collapsed, now that the constitution collapsed, because our personal interests were not taken care of. It's not to say that there weren't many good things in the Bombers draft, because it was addressing the problems Kenyans were facing. Problems of land, problems of equity, and all those things that I've said earlier. So a marriage of convenience was created. We talk the language of the Constitution. Once we disagree, then even that Constitution, we don't need it. And you remember the banana versus orange campaign. The red. So that took us to another marriage of convenience called the Nusumkate government that came after the 2007-2008 post-election violence. We saw after that election of 2007, about 1,200 Kenyans, or more than 1,200 Kenyans, were killed, properties destroyed, women raped. A lot of damage was caused to the country. 6 prominent Kenyans, including President Uhuru, then Deputy President Ruto, Mudaura, and General Lee, were charged with serious crimes before the ICC. Once again, the political class ganged up and gave birth to yet another, that political marriage called Nusumkate. But as soon as their interests were satisfied, whatever we were talking about, constitutional implementation was forgotten. You all know the second last one, that marriage of convenience was what's called the handshake government. It came immediately after the 2017 election and the swearing in of one of the losers in that election in 2018. So a government of convenience was created. So all the agitations about, the problems of Kenya, effective implementation of the constitution was again swept under the table. And of course, there we saw a clear violation of Article 3, Sub-Article 2 of the constitution that says any attempt to establish a government otherwise than in compliance with this constitution is unlawful. The impression was then created that Kenya has 2 presidents. Then you wonder, okay, they will govern under which constitution? Which constitutions, rather? Now, I have a suspicion there is another government in the bathing called the bipartisan dialogue government. Whether this will become a government, as we have seen in the others, or not, but something in my view is cooking. However, this again, of course, followed the Maandamano Mondays. Some lives have since been lost, business is disrupted, and property is destroyed. The consequence, I believe, is to birth yet another false political marriage. Now, the real stakeholders were left behind. That's why you hear this bipartisan dialogue will only happen in Parliament. And there's already hints of constitutional amendment. I'm not a prophet of doom, neither am I the son of one, but I believe you me, if that amendment is going to come, it will be to try and accommodate these political interests, not necessarily to look at the interests of the country at large. But the last one that I think sums all this up is the fact that in Kenya today, there is lack of ideology or principle or even a stance in life in what you believe in when people talk politics. I'll just give you a simple example. Every election year, there is a new coalition, even of sworn enemies. People who stand in the pulpits here and insult each other. Tomorrow they become very good friends. In fact, I didn't know, I could not imagine. I thought it maybe it's a miracle, Mchungaji Nguyo, that Raila and Mother Karu actually will run together in the same ticket. Yeah? And many, many others. I can give many, many examples. So, but in the UK, for example, this, you will hear the Labour versus the Conservatives. In the United States, you predominantly hear the Republican versus the Democrats. You don't see that shifting like chameleons, the changing of colors like chameleons do, or the way we change clothes every other day. That means there are no principles that actually guide the manner in which leadership in this country even implements the Constitution, even on personal belief in the Constitution. It is important to note that even after losing the election, the Constitution provides for avenues to remedy any electoral malpractice. The losing parties have always gone to court. They've always moved to court to seek remedies. Even after the law is applied, they will refuse to accept the judgment of the court and resort to what? Negotiations on how to address this problem. That's what is manifesting right now in our country. In other words, it is their personal political interests that dictates how we are governed rather than the Constitution of our republic. At the heart of all the above political interests and intrigues is a lot of empty and rhetorical talk about a new constitution, let's review the constitution, let's amend the constitution, purportedly to serve the interests of the country. So the constitution has always been used as an excuse by politicians to bring them together, form coalition government, but it is never to implement the very constitution they keep referring to in those conversations in order to serve the 50+ million Kenyans. So what are some of the violations that we've seen in the recent past? First one, which is most annoying Kenyans mostly right now, is the creation of the offices of the chief administrative secretaries. This office is basically expanding the national executive, the government. Now, for you to expand the national executive, there is a power, a function of the president contained in Article 132, sub-Article 4, Part A, that says that if the president is desirous of creating an office in the public service, it must be recommended by the Public Service Commission. Now, Public Service Commission, as a national organ, is governed by the principles of governance in Article 10 and the principles in Chapter 15, creating independent offices. So it must come again to ask the people of Kenya and ask us, like, we think there is a lacuna in the effective implementation of government affairs. We want to create this office in the public service. What do you think? And then they also have to consider financial implication to you, the taxpayer. Article 201 of Chapter 12, Public Finance, says that public money must be spent prudently. Now, we were told that the coffers were empty and that we are broke. So why would we spend money that you do not have? Will you go to the supermarket today with a limited budget and then go on a shopping spree of a shop? How will you pay for it? The truth for the matter is that these positions are created to reward political friends and those that helped them to form the current government, which the deputy president has referred to as being a company with shareholders. The Constitution does not anticipate that our Constitution, our government, created under the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya, through the vote of the people, will be described as a company with shareholders. So where will the rest of us go? We have also now created other offices like a Prime Cabinet Secretary. It's not in the Constitution, including the office of the spouse of Prime Cabinet Secretary. You know, I don't know, if you are not annoyed, I don't know what will annoy you. But I don't want to insult you in the house of God so as to annoy you. But imagine those offices are now being created. Yeah? These offices are not provided for in the Constitution, as I said. You can also read this, when you read chapter 8, the National Executive, you will find that the Prime Cabinet Secretary's functions, as outlined, conflict with the constitutional offices of the Deputy President. So, in other words, the Prime Cabinet Secretary has been elevated, and actually I think that's a fact. He's been elevated to deputize the President, and the Deputy President has been demoted. I'm not saying I love them, but in protecting the Constitution, whoever it is we elected as our Deputy President should remain as a Deputy President, as the principal assistant to the President. That's the language in the Constitution. But we saw the directive that was given is that now the Prime Cabinet Secretary actually is a principal assistant, unlike the coordinator of government function. This is really undermining our Constitution. Formation of the National Executive. Article 130, Sub-Article 2 says that in forming the National Executive, you must take into consideration the national, regional, and ethnic diversity of the people of Kenya. We all live in Kenya. We know for a fact that our National Executive is populated mainly with two main tribes, the Kikuyus and the Kalenjin, with the two regions, Rift Valley and Watu wa Mulima. Now, I'm not saying if they were the best in terms of delivering services, but it goes against Article 130. Today, even if you want to find a competent El Molo, you'll find. An Ogiek, you'll find. And this also includes appointments to key parastatal bodies. It's a complete affront to the will of the people of Kenya in Article 130. The Constituency Development Fund is another violation. Functions of government, functions of the people of Kenya have since been devolved. If you read the fourth schedule to our Constitution, there are functions of the national government and there are functions of the county government. There is no function called functions for MPs. Theirs is only three. Represent the constituency you come from, pass legislation, and oversight government. But today they are clinging on to money, hundreds of millions of Kenya shillings, which they are using actually as a campaign kitty. They are telling you, I'll come and build a hospital for you. I'll do a school for you. That's not a right. That's not a privilege. It's a right. And that's why our constitution is very developmental in terms of those issues. But government has continued to allocate CDF funds to members of parliament. Whose value, by the way, I'm personally questioning. What is the value of 416 elected representatives in a country that is struggling economically? You know, you've got 416 people, you have given them a very fat salary, then they come and tell you, oh, I also need a mortgage allowance, I also need a car grant. When I sit down to do the work for which you are paying me, I also need a sitting allowance. I need medical insurance of about 10 million inpatient and all that. I've never seen, I mean, in the corporate world, will you employ an employee and then over and above that give them all this? You know, and that's why we created in the new constitution the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. So it has to fix all these problems. So they are gobbling about 37, if I'm not wrong, 37.5 billion annually. And that's only 416 people. Now, we residents in Nairobi here, we are about, what, 5 million? Maybe the most, 5, 6 million? But we are allocated about 12 billion annually. Where, I mean, do even the comparison. 416 people gobble 37.5 billion annually. 5 million people are allocated 12 billion. And from the 12 billion, we expect security, water, road, and all those things that we need for our day-to-day living. It's an unfair justice system. Then there is the Azimio la Umoja Coalition Political Party. You have constantly heard, under our laws, it's regulated under the Political Parties Act. You cannot, by law or by constitution, belong to two political parties at the same time. You can be either a member of one political party. But also the constitution requires for you to form a political party, you must have 1,000 members in a majority of counties, being 24. So you must have 24,000 living persons and registered to vote in Kenya. Now, can Jubilee cast a vote? You know, can ODM cast a vote? You cannot clear somebody with a party that is corporate. We don't even know whether there's something called a corporate political party in Kenya. There is no such thing. But lastly, the leadership and integrity chapter has been mutilated completely. I think this chapter does not mean big, but people praise Kenyans on this chapter. One of the questions I've never been able to answer in all these countries I've traveled to, I don't know whether Prof has been able to answer because he also consults a lot. People asked me in a number of countries, we love chapter 6 of your constitution because it talks about leadership and integrity, meaning Kenyans wanted a certain type and character of leaders so that when they occupy that office, they ooze respect. They will respect the people. You know, we will not want people who are suspected to have been rapists, thieves, murderers, occupying our public office. But I was asked, how come you elected 2 ICC suspects at that time? Recently, I was in South Sudan, and I said, it's interesting your cabinet was actually cleared by parliament when some of them confessed that, I fell down, it was dark, and I fell down in between the genitals of a woman. You heard the story? Let me not retell it here. But some would even confess, I've got 33 court cases. There is a murder suspect. There are people accused of having stolen public money and therefore denying the poor, the sick, water, electricity, and all those things, blood transfusion. But they are today in our cabinet. So when people read the Kenyan Constitution, they actually laugh about it when they look at the face of government. Now, in conclusion, so that we can go in some conversation before Prof speaks, political interests through political parties are regulated. So you can form a coalition of parties, a coalition, which includes political parties. Hence, the Political Parties Act. However, what plays out in the constitutional governance of our country are political interests that are outside the constitution and enabling rule of law. They continue to undermine the constitutional order of our country. If you want to amend our constitution, the process is clearly outlined in Article 255, 256, and 257. For example, attempt to expand the executive arm of government, you must either go parliamentary 256 or go to the people of Kenya through what's called popular initiative. Now, we have not seen this in the recent amendments. So political interests and alliances, by the way, are not necessarily a bad idea, especially if the intent and purpose is to jointly find solutions to our country's problems, as well as to enable effective governance of a country. There are countries that have gone into political coalitions to meet the political threshold in order to form a government. And there are many, many examples. This has worked effectively in countries like the United States of America. I don't know, maybe I'll refer to you to a book called Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. You know, Abraham Lincoln realized when he won the presidency, he wasn't really necessarily the best president elected. He looked around and saw, oh, there's somebody from the other side, the Democrats, who was better in terms of foreign policy, education, and health, and told them, listen, politics aside, now we are serving the American people. Hence that title, Team of Rivals. Now, ours is not really a team of rivals, but a team of rivals to eat. You see in our context, I think even among thieves now, clearly, there is honor among thieves. They can decide to steal together, but not necessarily to serve. In Germany, Angela Merkel ran that country for nearly 15 years, or if not more, through coalitions, and ensured that Germany was one of the strongest economies in the world. And it was through coalitions. So coalitions are not necessarily bad. The United Kingdom has gone into coalition, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, during the time of Cameron. Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, governed for a long time through coalitions. So coalitions sometimes are necessary to meet the constitutional threshold in order to govern a country effectively. But now let me turn to you as Christians. You are aware that if it wasn't for political interests of Pontius Pilate, Jesus Christ would not have been crucified. Political interests allowed the release of Barnabas, a thief, and allowed the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, we are calling the Savior. So you can see that was a political interest. But now I was corrected during the break after the first service, that where is this political interest coming from? It's coming from you, the people. Pontius Pilate was pressured by the Wanjiku of that time. They said, crucify him, and they released Barnabas. So now I have a question for us before I complete. As teachings of the church truly influence our behavior in society, including respect for the rule of law, especially when we conduct ourselves politically? As the church influenced us, we see a lot of abuse and incitement in political podiums, all against the religious teachings, as well as the constitution. I have observed that in Kenya, we pray before eating, before political rallies, before any gathering. Immediately after that, we start insulting each other. I have also observed that it is at the pulpits that politicians commonly respond to each other politically. They are using you to settle their political fights in your space. My advice, you must not allow them to do that here. Let me ask also another question. Do we even need the Constitution, arguably, as a Christian religious country? Now, if we cannot only obey 10 articles of the 10 commandments, which is really the Constitution in another language, then we don't need a man-written Constitution with 264 articles that we are unable to respect. Because my argument is this: if we are living by the 10 commandments, both in terms of the spirit and even the letter of those 10 commandments, then honestly, we don't need a written law called the Constitution, which now I've confirmed today, you have all not read. Lastly, one of the cardinal roles of the church is to speak truth to power, to call the devil by its name. You cannot remain silent anymore. Even Jesus commanded that give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. So, if politicians expect of you to pay taxes, the government of the day expects of you to pay taxes because it's the law of the land, then we should also demand for them to uphold the Constitution, which is our will as the people of Kenya. Thank you very much.
Well, it's now my pleasure to ask Professor PLO Lumumba to come and greet you and say a few things.
Thank you very much, my good friend, Dr. Ekuru Aukot. And thank you very much, members of the congregation, on this Easter day. And this is an important day for any Christians. And this is a day that we must honor, but which we don't. Because I was not scheduled to speak, I was just thinking about this day. And several things came to my mind, because there are those who, even as we speak, doubt that Christ has risen. And I want to submit to you, fellow Christians, that doubt is the foundation of faith. If you do not doubt, you cannot be faithful. And throughout history, faith has been fed by doubt. If you doubt me, I want you after this to go and read the book of Luke, chapter 7, verses 18 through to 23. And when you read, you will find this short story about John the Baptist sending his 2 disciples to Christ. And these are the instructions of John. Go and ask him if he is the one who was sent, or we should wait for another one. And it is recorded in the Bible that they found Christ healing and preaching. And Christ tells them, go and tell John, that the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, and the gospel is being preached to the poor. And he concludes at verse 23, blessed is he who is not ashamed of me. That is John the Baptist, doubting. He was in prison, and many of us here may be doubting. Do not doubt. You'll also find the same message in the book of John, I believe, at chapter 14. When Philip asks, now that you have been asked, show us the Father. And Christ says, but I've been with you all this while, Philip. Do you want me to show you the Father? The Father is in me, and I am in the Father. Doubt. I can go on, but it's not mine to preach. It's mine merely to add to what my brother said. I encourage you to go and once again read Proverbs chapter 28, verse 2. And he said in the Proverbs, when a nation is rebellious, it has many rulers. But those who have knowledge have ordered. We are a rebellious nation. We are a nation which claims that we are the church. And the question has been asked both by the pastor and by my friend Dr. Ekuru Aukot. Well, what about the church? Who is the church? We are the church. Many times in this country we confuse the church. We think the clergy are the church. No, we are the church. And we live at a time in this country when there are many, many false teachings. And if you doubt me, go and read Matthew chapter 24, verse 24. In which is recorded that in these ages there'll be many Christs, and they'll work many wonders. So that if it were not for God, even the very elect would be confused. There are many Christs, but today we are honoring the Christ. And I want you also go and read Paul's second letter to Timothy at chapter 3, where he says, in these last days, there'll be many forms of Christianity where people are lovers of themselves. I'm submitting that we are in those days. And as I conclude, I want you to look at our nation. I'm not a doomsday prophet. But if we continue on this trajectory, this nation as we know it will not exist. And you know that God says it. He told the Israelites that you may pray and I'll not listen to you. Don't think that God is listening to our hypocritical prayers. We are hypocrites who are Christians here, and we are Luos and Kikuyus. Immediately we leave this. Yet the Bible says there are no Jews, no Gentiles, no men, no women. We have a constitution which we honor in breach. We have 10 commandments which we think are 10 suggestions by God. On the 13th day of April, the year 1655, on the floor of the house in France, one of the most infamous French kings, King Louis XIV, was asked, "And what is the state?" And this was his response: "L'État, c'est moi. I am the state." When I look at Kenya, I see such people who think that they are the state. They are above the law. And we worship them. We worship them. If any one of them were to come right now, you would stand up. Even the pastor would stand up. I've seen it in churches. The God that we worship must not be mocked. And we mock him on a daily basis in this country. So you have been told about the Constitution. We hear these ethnic warlords whom we worship. I've heard one of them even being referred to by his followers as God the Son. One. And he doesn't rebuke them. So, brethren, let us pray for our country in earnest. Let us pray. And I hope that God will spare this country as we respect the Constitution. Because I remember on that day, when God had determined to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, God in his divine wisdom and mercy said, "But I shall not conceal this decision from my bosom friend Abraham. I shall disclose to him what I intend to do." So he sent the angels and they went to Abraham and they told Abraham, "We are going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah." But then Abraham said, "If you go to Sodom and Gomorrah and find that there are 50 people, will you still destroy it?" And the angel said, "We will not." And they said, Abraham said, "Now that I've contended with God, what if there were 50 less 5? Would you still destroy it?" Said, "No, I will not." "Now that I've contended with you, what about if there are 20? Said, "I will not." "What about if there were 10? I will not." "What about if there were 5? I will not." And he was thinking about 5. Lut, the wife, the sons. There were not 5 found. And Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And Lut's wife looked back. And he became a pillar of salt. I pray and hope that there are more than 5 in this country. Because if there is not, we will be consumed in the fire of the leaders who have sinned and continue to sin against God. This pulpit in this country has now been misused. Sometimes I wonder, but Christ is with us and he listens. Let us pray in earnest. And let us hope that Christ himself will be our salvation. On the 23rd day of March, I'm in the business of writing as my civic duty. 23rd day of March, I wrote to all the leaders of the major churches and religions in this country. All of them. All. Only 2 have responded to me. Not even my bishop. Only Archbishop Muheria of the Catholic Church in Nyeri has responded to me. And the chairman of the Council of Imams. The rest have not. Because the thing that I spoke about, too painful. Too close to the wound, too close to the pocket. But yet we must continue speaking because that is our civic duty. God bless you.
It's like Prof has answered some of the questions that are here. So there's one of the questions, okay, name not written. How do we deal with Raila and Ruto constitutionally? That's a very tough one, constitutionally. But let me just remind us. The problem, the way I honestly see it, is that sometimes it's not about these leaders. It emanates from us. These leaders don't come from planet Mars or Jupiter. They come from us. We are the ones who elect them. And they are not new in government. So, I will throw this question back to you. How much evaluation of these leaders do you conduct before re-electing them? Election cycle after election cycle. The reason they behave the way they behave like Kenya belongs to them, that Kenya is their shamba and they have got a title deed, is because you have empowered them. I had a proposal, and we did this in our letter, in a press release. We suggested a radical proposal that from the Maandamano on Monday, we acknowledge the fact that under Article 37 of the Kenya Constitution, you have got the right to demonstrate, the right to form political association. But there is a key word there, peaceably. Now, when you, the organizer of a demonstration or picketing, you call on your members and they go violent, they destroy people's property, they kill, they destroy cars, we suggested that they must bear the greatest responsibility. I do believe Uhuru Kenyatta and Ruto never raped anybody in 2007, 2008. They never vandalized anybody's property, but they bore the greatest responsibility as the leaders of those factions. So, there's nothing special about Raila. He is not above the law. Martha Karua is not above the law. Eugene Wamalwa isn't. And all those mobilizers of this demonstration that actually cause harm to innocent Kenyans. In fact, I find it very laughable that you can complain about the cost of living and the economy, yet you destroy the property of Mama Mboga. You instill fear on that border guy not to use a certain route, aren't you affecting that person economically even more? So my proposal is all these people must bear the greatest responsibility as leaders. And for somebody who is already in government, we have to keep talking, like Prof has said. We have to keep speaking truth to this power. And I think for me, like Mchungaji Nguyo has said, I think the church, you've also been too quiet. You've been too quiet. And you're entertaining them. But honestly, if we deconstruct what the church is, Prof has answered, it is us, individuals, who leave this door today, and then we become Kenyans there complaining, lamenting about the problems of this country that is being caused by politicians. So why can't we speak to them openly and brutally? Honest. Doesn't the Bible say the truth shall set us free? So, we are not speaking, and we must speak. But we must also reject these leaders at election. We are the same people who are mobilized around tribe. It's our time. It's our time to be president. So what if we become president? The rest of us go where? You know, I see leadership in a country like a value system that we instill at our homes. It must cascade downwards. Assuming the president of the country is the father figure of this nation, then that value we see up there must cascade downwards. There's a saying that goes this way, that fish starts rotting from the head. And probably this is where we are as a country. Because the people who are picking to leaders are actually not instilling any value in the electorate. So that the electorate slide back into this issue of pesa, handouts. And we end up electing bad leaders. It's also true that the leadership of our country is a reflection of the kind of society that we are. So even we cannot run away from responsibility as the electorate. We must, you know. So there's another, I think this is from Mr. Nduati, just a comment. I'm having problem reading some of your handwritings. Is the problem not all of us? I think we've answered that. Do we have political parties in Kenya? To be honest with you, although I'm a leader of a political party, hardly do political party pursue any ideology or any principle. That's why I gave the example of them changing names, but it's the same people. You know, even if today I dress up a monkey or a gorilla in the finest of suits, will that monkey gorilla cease to be a gorilla? So, when people change political parties, it is supposed to dupe you. And they come up with political narratives that are very sweet. Today, I don't hear much of Mama Mboga. I don't hear much of Boda Boda. I don't hear much of bottom-up approach. Now we are hearing a confession. If you want to whip us, our buttocks are ready. Because we have no... And some of these people are not new in government. They have been there. Yeah? So, I think, I doubt any of the political parties have got ideology or they pursue any ideology at all. What to do beyond lamentation? Okay, my very little experience in politics is that a majority of us, if not almost all of us, have decided to sit on the fence, lament, and become curious onlookers. We have refused to get involved. Yet political decisions affect all of us in equal measure. So, we have to get involved. Stop saying politics is dirty. Mutapaka yo matope. Sababu you don't want to clean yourself. Part of cleaning yourself is to actually offer yourself and get the best people into office. And when they make mistakes, don't say mutu wetu. You've seen the behavior of Kenyans. Somebody has a public office, he has stolen money, and then the moment he brings someone at EACC, you see a demonstration. Munaonea mutu wetu. Yet he has stolen money that has even affected services to yourself, to his own village. So our mindset, we really have to change. There's another year. Where do I take my frustrations? I so badly want to protest, but alone, where do I go physically? I pray, however, faith without deeds is dead. I agree. I think, like I say, there are many people who shy away from political discourse because they say, I'm not a politician. How can you say you're not a politician when you are supposed to exercise a political decision or a democratic right, a protected right? The day we will get involved probably is the day we will try to address many of our problems. Getting frustrated alone is not enough. And by the way, Article 37 allows for people to demonstrate. Get involved. Speak to your neighbor. Speak to your community where you come from. You know, speak to your groupings, your friends. Tell them, let's change our mindset about this country. So, you know, when I decided to run for president in 2017, some of my closest friends were asking me, are you crazy? Are you mad? I tell them why. But you are from the Turkana community, you are a small. Can you, how many numbers do you guys have? How many are you even in Nairobi? You see, that tribal backward thinking is so much ingrained in us today as Kenyans. We don't look at ideas. We don't look at issues. When I promoted Punguza Mizigo Bill, which for me, I'm not saying it was perfect. It wasn't perfect. But it has some very, very good proposal there that will have actually equalized this country. For example, we wanted the Ward Development Fund to be protected under the Constitution. Because the truth for the matter today, if your member of the county assembly is not in good talking terms with the governor, he ends up being a beggar to bring services to the ward, to the people who elected him. So we wanted to promote that. We wanted to reduce the size of parliament because we are saying, what is the value of all these 416 parliamentarians? They are gobbling billions of money. We don't even know. You know, I remember back in the days when there was the shadow cabinet under the Moi regime. I still remember someone like Bilo Kero as a shadow minister for economic. You could see debates in parliament. You know, these days, ni soko jinga tu tuko nayo. There's no value. So, I think we should get, Donald S. Minor is asking, what should we do to the electorate? I think that question we have answered. Get involved, educate them, talk to them about the Constitution, but also begin by reading the Constitution. Okay. Israel above the law? Nobody is above the law. How is it that he continues to violate the Constitution and the law gets away with it? He says he will go back to the people. To be honest with you, this is a factor of cowardice in the current political leadership. It's a factor of cowardice. They have no courage whatsoever to confront a man who is actually mobilizing the violation of the law, the disruption of the economy, because they are birds of a feather. They know each other. I guess if the positions were changed, they would probably also do the same thing, knowing, for example, that is their modus operandi. I'm told to wrap up. There are so many questions here, but I think some we have answered. The Supreme Court decision in terms of the LGBTQ, I'll answer it briefly this way. You know, our laws outlaw homosexuality and all those things. So, in my honest opinion, when you say it's okay, the right to association is okay, you're also saying it's okay to continue doing an unlawful act or committing an unlawful act. That is the consequence. Because if you are members of this community that are not allowed by operation of our own penal laws not to conduct ourselves in a certain way, now you are saying, no, it's the right of those people to actually associate. To associate to do what? To commit that illegality. So I don't agree with the Supreme Court in that decision, because they need to look at, and maybe this is where the church really needs to come out strongly, Mchungaji Nguyo. You see, on this LGBT debate, the way I see it, there is an imposition of another people's culture into our culture. And I think we need to say no to it. You know, it's not our culture to carry guns and shoot people. Maybe that's an American culture. Because in America, in Europe, if you are a pedophile, to just use an example, you'll be jailed. And when you come from jail, your name will be posted in a public space so that people know here lives a pedophile who is a danger to your children. So why do they do that? That's their culture. But this LGBT issue, in my view, is not part of our culture. And law, we're discussing law here, law or even constitutions emanate from within the framework of society. That particular society, what do they believe in? So it's an imposition in my view. But then you should not be surprised why they have been visiting State House in large numbers. Or question of Raila, again, I think that one we have answered. Land rates and all that, how can we save Kenya from greed, corruption? I think we need to redefine the word corruption. We need to remove it from our books. Let's just call it theft as it is. Because if we give you money to build a hospital, and we cannot see that hospital, what have you done with the money? So you have stolen. Yeah? In Kikuyu, you call it muishi. Yeah? Yeah. So, if somebody has stolen money, let's just call him a thief. Because then they call it corruption. What is that? What does it mean to have a bipartisan? You see, the word bipartisan, of course, means two. And that's why they're taking it to parliament. So it will be Azimio and KK government. But my argument is, and we have argued this in other forum, it must be multi-partisan. As a matter of fact, I don't even support this bipartisan dialogue. If we really want to address the problems of this country, they have already been established in a number of reports. Why don't we implement the TJRC report, the Ndungu report on land, the Akiumi report, the work report on post-election violence, the Krieger report on how we managed our election? They are shelving those reports because they have identified what's wrong with our country. Because we know if we implement those reports, we will catch up with them. So this is just another gimmick, in my view, to bring back the idea of another handshake. Going to court when a right has been violated, what does it entail? for one, is not. I think my proposal here, and Prof. Lumumba was my teacher of law, and back in the days, we used to cite the Supreme Court of India, what they called the epistolary jurisdiction. I think we need to simplify, I agree, in our laws on how even an ordinary citizen can just write a letter to a Minister of Justice or the Chief Justice, and that can be reduced into a complaint. I think we are still too complex. People think you must go to a lawyer, you must draft your documents in such a way. If a violation has taken place, a human rights violation, we should really simplify our procedure in such a way that just writing that complaint, the way you've been affected, should really constitute a proper complaint. Because not everybody can afford legal services. Second, lastly, Pastor, I'm just about to finish. That have been going on. What are the rights of those who have not? Yeah. So you're saying, what are the rights of those who do not want to take part in Mandamano? What can they do when one seems to care? I think, like I said, if this government of the day was courageous enough, and that Mandamano is affecting those who are not interested in it, it must then take strict action against the leadership of this Mandamano. You remember the Sabot Land Defense Forces. The government decided to go after the man called Matakwe. It didn't go against all the other Saboti people, even though it's called Sabot Land Defense Forces. It went after Matakwe. And since then, that issue was redressed. So today, if we had a courageous leadership that believes in the rule of law, believes in the will of the people, it will tell Raila, Mother Karua, Eugene Wamalwa, you take greater responsibility for the harm you are causing other innocent Kenyans. And that will be a leadership that we can admire. Now, there is this one, I don't know how you can read it. GN Karaoke. Is it GN Karaoke? I'm struggling with your handwriting. You're also bringing the issue of 1 man, 1 shilling, and 1 vote be implemented as a policy to minimize use of tribalism, tribal languages. I'm not sure 1 man, 1 vote really is a solution for this country. Because today, let me tell you, I'll give you a very practical example. I come from Turkana, and in Turkana, some of the people we rely on in terms of business development are actually Kikuyus. We're also now relying on Luos to fish in Lake Turkana, because us Turkanas, we only like to eat meat. And we joke that the fish in Lake Turkana die out of old age because there's nobody to eat this fish. So we appreciate when the Luos come and teach our people how to do fishing. We appreciate when the Kikuyu business people come and teach our people about business. I think the idea of 1 vote, 1 man, 1 whatever is very divisive for this country. As a matter of fact, I would rather we strengthen the use of the wards as the units of accelerating development in this country. And that idea of 1 vote, 1 man will cease to be an issue for me. Because if services are brought to your very doorstep through the ward, the smallest units of development, it does not matter whether you are a ward in Kiambu or in Turkana, in Lokichogi or Lunga, so long as you feel you are getting the same services, that for me is the fastest way we can equalize this country. And it will remove this idea of 1 man, 1 vote, 1 shilling, whatever. Because then, even populations grow in certain areas. You need other areas, because that will bring segregation and tribal animosity, which I don't think is a desirable thing. I think let me stop here because Bishop needs to.
Yeah, let's put our hands together again for Dr.